40 years building houses, and in 40 seconds, they destroyed my soul. They spit in my face in front of 250 people. But that same night, while they toasted to my humiliation, I signed the contract that would change everything. If this story touches your heart, subscribe every day. There is a new story that could be yours. Tell us where you're watching from. My name is Brian. I am 68 years old, and today I am going to tell you the most painful story of my life. A story that still aches in my chest when I remember it, but that I need to get out because it's killing me from the inside. It was the day my own son, the blood of my blood, looked me in the eyes and said the words I never thought I would hear from him. "There's no room for you here, Dad." And he said it in front of 250 people in the ballroom of the most elegant hotel in the city during the 40th anniversary celebration of the company I built with these hands. I can still feel the bitter taste that formed in my mouth when I heard those words. It was as if I had been hit in the stomach with a sledgehammer. But worse, because the hammer was held by Derek, my eldest son, the same boy I used to carry on my shoulders when he was little, so he could see how I built the houses, the same one who told me, "Dad, when I grow up, I want to be just like you." There he was, in his $2.500 suit that I paid for, standing at the microphone as if he owned everything, telling everyone present that it was time for the old man to retire. The silence that fell over that ballroom was deafening. I could feel all eyes on me, some of pity, others of morbid curiosity, waiting to see what old Brian would do. My hands began to tremble, not from fear, but from a rage I had never felt in my entire life, a rage that rose from my stomach to my throat, threatening to come out as a desperate scream. But I remained silent, paralyzed, watching as my son continued to speak, thanking everyone for coming to see me off from the company as if I were already dead. Sarah, my daughter-in-law, stood beside him with a smile that chilled my blood. A fake smile, the kind practiced in front of a mirror, while she applauded her husband's words as if they were heavenly music. That woman whom I welcomed into my home like a daughter, who ate at my table for 12 years, who would hug me and say, "Dad Brian," with so much affection. There she was, celebrating my humiliation. And the most painful part of it all is that my daughter Amanda, my only daughter, was also applauding. My Amanda, who was supposed to be on my side, nodding her head as if everything were normal. I remember trying to stand up, to walk to the microphone, to say something, anything. But my legs wouldn't respond. It was as if the weight of 40 years of work, of sacrifice, of early mornings under the sun, building houses to give them a better life, had fallen on my shoulders all at once. I felt like I couldn't breathe, that the lump in my throat was going to choke me. And then Derek kept talking, saying that the company needed new blood, that times had changed, that there was no longer a place for outdated methods. Outdated methods. Those were his exact words, as if the values I taught him, honesty, hard work, respect for the employees, were something to be ashamed of. As if everything I had built with these hands, every brick I laid, every contract I signed with a handshake in my word, was something obsolete that had to be thrown in the trash. My own son was erasing me from the history of my own company, turning my legacy into an awkward anecdote from the past. Then came the most humiliating moment of all. Derek called 2 security guards, 2 young men I had hired myself, who knew my grandchildren, who had eaten barbecue at my house on Sundays. One of them, Tom, couldn't even look me in the eye when he approached. "Mr. Brian," he whispered to me, "please don't make this any harder for me." And I understood. My own son had planned all of this. It wasn't a farewell. It was an expulsion, a public humiliation, so that everyone could see that Brian no longer called the shots at the company he himself had founded. I rose from my chair with all the dignity I could muster. I walked towards the exit while everyone watched me in silence, some with pity, others with relief, as if my presence had been a burden all these years. I could hear the murmurs behind me, the voices beginning to comment on what had just happened. "Poor Mr. Brian," someone said. "It was time," another whispered, and I kept walking, feeling that each step took me further, not only from the ballroom, but from the entire life I had built. Before leaving, I turned around one last time. I wanted to see my son's face. I wanted him to look me in the eyes, to feel even a little bit of remorse for what he was doing to me. But Derek had his back to the stage, laughing with Sarah and some guests, as if nothing had happened, as if finishing off his father was the most natural thing in the world. Amanda was drinking champagne, toasting to the company's new beginning. Neither of my children looked at me. For them, I no longer existed. I left that hotel feeling like my soul had been ripped from my body. The cool night air hit my face like a slap. And for the first time in 40 years, I didn't know what to do with my life. I was 68 years old. I had just lost my company. And what hurt the most was that I had lost it at the hands of my own children. I walked to my truck, that old Ford I had bought when the company was starting to grow, and I sat there, my hands on the steering wheel, trying to understand how I had reached this point. But that night, while they continued to celebrate in the hotel, while they toasted my humiliation and planned how to divide up what I had built, I did something they never imagined, something that would change everything forever. I opened the glove compartment of my truck and took out an envelope I had been saving for months, waiting for the right moment. Inside was the proposal I had received from Apex Builders, our biggest competitor. And that very night at 11:30, I signed the contract that would make them pay for everything they had done to me. For you to understand what happened that night, I need to take you back 40 years when I was 26 years old and had absolutely nothing but 2 hands willing to work and a dream that seemed impossible. It was 1984, and I had just arrived in New York City from a small town in the Midwest where there was no future for anyone. I brought my wife, Mary, pregnant with Derek, and a suitcase with 3 changes of clothes. We slept in a tiny rooftop room that cost us half of what I earned, carrying cement bags on a construction site. But I had something that no one could take away from me, the certainty that one day I would build something great. I remember the first time Derek saw me work. He was 5 years old, and Mary would bring him to the site where I was laying the foundations of a small house. It was my first independent job, a small 2-bedroom house for a young couple who had given me the opportunity because I charged less than the others. Derek was fascinated watching me mix the cement, how I laid the bricks one by one. "Dad," he said to me, "do you make the houses so people can live inside?" And I explained that yes, every house we built was the home where someone would be happy, where children would grow, where families would make their memories. The first few years were hard, harder than anyone can imagine. I worked from 5 in the morning until 8 at night, 7 days a week. My hands were always cracked, full of calluses that would bleed when the cold was very harsh. Mary would treat my wounds every night with alcohol and bandages without ever complaining. although I knew it pained her to see me come home so tired. But every dollar we earned, we saved. Every penny had a destination: to buy better tools, hire a helper, get better quality materials. Because it was clear to me that this was not just a job, it was the future of my family. Derek grew up seeing that sacrifice. I took him with me on Saturdays so he would understand where the money that paid for his food, his clothes, his school came from. I taught him how to carry the small bricks, how to mix lime with sand, how to measure with a tape measure. He would tell me, "Dad, teach me everything. I want to build houses like you." And I would get excited, thinking that one day we would work together, that he would continue what I had started. I never imagined that the same hands I taught to work would be the ones to one day push me out of my own company. When Derek turned 7, we already had 3 employees and had finished our first apartment building. It was small, only 6 units, but to me, it represented the whole world. The day we handed over the keys to the families, Derek was there with me, watching as young couples hugged their children in their new homes. A woman approached me with tears in her eyes and said, "Mr. Bryan, you don't know what it means for us to have our own home." And Derek asked me, "Dad, is that why we do this? So that people can be happy?" I told him yes. That was the most important reason of all. Shortly after, Amanda was born and the company continued to grow. We already had 8 employees, 2 trucks, and contracts to build houses in 3 different neighborhoods. Mary told me we could rest a little, that we had already achieved what we were looking for. But I had a bigger vision. I wanted my children to never go through what I had gone through. I wanted to give them an education, opportunities, a secure future. So, I kept working, I kept building, I kept dreaming, and always thinking that one day Derek would be by my side, continuing the family tradition. During Derek's teenage years, the company was already well known throughout the city. We had built over 250 houses and 4 apartment buildings. Derek was studying business at the most expensive private university in the city, the same one where Amanda was studying architecture. I felt proud to be able to pay for the education I never had. I thought they were preparing to take over the company, to take it to the next level, with knowledge I didn't have. Every dollar I invested in their education, I considered an investment in the family's future. When Derek graduated, we had a party at the same construction site where he had learned to carry bricks as a child. I invited all the employees, our most important clients, the suppliers who had trusted us for all those years. In my speech, I said that my son was now ready to help me build the next chapter of our story. Derek hugged me that night and whispered in my ear, "Thanks for everything. Dad, I promise I will take care of everything you've built." Those words were etched in my heart. And for years, I remembered them whenever I had doubts about the decisions I was making in the company. Derek's first few years at the company were good. He brought new ideas, computer systems that I didn't understand. But that made everything more efficient. He modernized processes, improved accounting, secured larger contracts with more important companies. I was proud to see how he applied what he had studied, how he combined my experience with his knowledge. Amanda also joined after graduating, designing more modern houses more attractive to young clients. For the first time in my life, I felt that the family dream was complete, the 3 of us working together for the same goal. But now, remembering all that, as I drive through the empty streets after that humiliation, I realized that maybe that's where it all began. Maybe it was when I started to cede responsibilities, when I began to trust them so much that I stopped paying attention to the signs. Derek started making decisions without consulting me, changing procedures that had worked for years, talking about modernizing the company as if everything I had done was wrong. And I allowed it because I trusted him, because I thought it was part of the natural process of passing the baton from one generation to the next. Mary died 4 years ago, and with her went the only person who truly understood what the company meant to me. It was more than a business. It was the result of 40 years of getting up before dawn, of working under the sun, of sacrificing vacations and rest to build something that would last forever. But my children never understood that. For them, the company was just numbers on a piece of paper, profits to be distributed, a business that could be optimized. They never understood that every brick we laid carried a piece of my soul, that every house we built was part of my legacy. And that night at the hotel, I finally confirmed that for them. I was no longer their father. I was just an obstacle. The next 8 years were the best of my life, or at least that's what I believed at the time. Harrison Builders had become one of the most respected in the entire state. We had 70 employees, a fleet of 12 trucks, and multi-million-dollar government contracts to build social housing. Derek already had his office on the second floor with windows overlooking the entire city. And Amanda had designed more than 100 houses that appeared in architecture magazines. I felt like a king, but a king who had built his kingdom brick by brick without inheriting anything from anyone. And most importantly, my children were there with me, learning, growing, preparing for the future I had dreamed for them since they were little. I vividly remember the day Derek proposed that we expand to other states. We were in my office reviewing the quarterly numbers when he spread out on my desk some plans and projections he had been preparing for weeks. "Dad," he said, "we can open branches in Los Angeles and Miami. I have everything calculated. The initial investment, the contacts, the permits. In 4 years, we could triple our revenue." His eyes shone with an excitement that reminded me of the boy who helped me carry bricks. I felt proud to see how my son had learned to dream big, just as I had taught him. Without a second's hesitation, I told him yes, that I trusted him completely, that it was time for the Harrisons to conquer the whole country. The expansion was a resounding success, but it was also the beginning of something I couldn't see at the time. Derek started traveling constantly, spending weeks at a time in the other cities, overseeing the new operations. When he returned, he brought stories of important businessmen he had met, of more modern construction methods, of business opportunities that I, according to him, couldn't understand because they belonged to another generation. At first, I laughed at his comments, thinking it was the natural arrogance of youth. But gradually, I realized that he no longer consulted me on important decisions. He handled meetings with large clients on his own. He signed new contracts without me reviewing them. When I asked him about it, he would say, "Relax, Dad. Everything is under control. You rest and enjoy what you've achieved." Amanda also began to change during that time. She married an architect from a wealthy family from the capital and slowly began to adopt manners and customs that I did not recognize in my daughter. She started arriving late to family gatherings, criticizing the decor of my house, suggesting that I should get with the times if I wanted to remain relevant in the company. One day, she told me something that hurt me deeply. "Dad, you can't keep running the company like it's your little neighborhood shop. This is a corporation now. It needs professionals, not feelings." Those words sounded strange coming from my daughter's mouth, as if someone else had taught them to her. But I preferred to think it was part of her professional growth, that she was learning to separate business from family. It was then that Sarah appeared in our lives. Derek met her at a young entrepreneurs conference in Boston, and from the first day he brought her home, I felt that something was not right. She was a beautiful, well-educated woman with studies abroad, but there was something in the way she looked at me that made me uncomfortable. It was as if she were evaluating me, calculating how much I was worth and how much useful time I had left. When she spoke to me, it was always with a perfect smile, but her eyes remained cold, distant. Mary, who was still alive at that time, commented to me one night, "Brian, that girl doesn't look at Derek with love. She looks at him as if he were a prize she won." But I wanted to believe that my son had found the woman of his life, so I ignored those signs. Derek and Sarah's wedding was the most important social event our family had ever organized. We spent over $80, on a ceremony that was featured in all the city's society magazines. I was happy to be able to give my son that celebration, to show the world that the Harrisons had come a long way. During the couple's first dance, Derek sought me out with his gaze from the dance floor and smiled at me as if to say, "Thank you for all this, Dad." I felt like the luckiest man in the world, believing that my family was complete, that my children had found their place in life, and that the company would continue for many generations to come. How naive I was to think that money and success could guarantee family loyalty and love. The first few years of the marriage were apparently normal, but I began to notice subtle changes in Derek that worried me. Sarah had started to voice her opinions on company matters, suggesting improvements to our processes, questioning decisions I had made for decades. Derek listened to her with an attention he had never given me, nodding at her comments as if they were divine revelations. At family dinners, she dominated the conversations, talking about truly successful companies she knew, more efficient management methods, the importance of renewing obsolete structures. Every word was a subtle but effective stab. I began to feel like a stranger at my own table, listening to my family discuss the future of my company as if I were no longer present. The last straw was when Sarah convinced Derek that we needed to hire external consultants to modernize the company. 3 executives from a consulting firm from the capital arrived with expensive suits and the latest laptops to tell us how we should run the business I had built from scratch. For a week, they reviewed all our processes, interviewed employees, analyzed our numbers. In the end, they presented a 120-page report that basically said that I was the main problem with the company, that my paternalistic leadership style was limiting growth, that we needed more modern corporate governance structures. Derek accepted all their recommendations without even consulting me, as if I were just another employee and not the founder of the company. That's when the systematic campaign to remove me from important decisions began. Derek created an executive committee consisting of himself, Amanda, and Sarah, which met every week to make strategic decisions. I was informed afterward as a courtesy, presented with the decisions already made as fate's accomplice. When I tried to question a decision or propose an alternative, they told me that it had already been thoroughly analyzed and that my opinion, although valuable due to my experience, did not align with the company's strategic direction. It was a polite way of telling me to shut up, that I no longer had a voice or a vote in the company I had created with my own hands, with my blood and sweat. During those months of transition, I tried to adapt to understand that maybe they were right, that maybe I was too old to understand the new ways of doing business. I started arriving at the office later, leaving earlier, letting them handle everything while I focused on supervising the construction sites, which was what I did best. But even there, they started to limit me. Derek hired a director of operations to oversee the constructions, arguing that I needed to delegate more responsibilities to enjoy my successful career. It was an elegant way of telling me they no longer trusted my judgment, that my 40 years of experience were worth less than the university degree of a 28-year-old who had never laid a brick in his life. The breaking point came one Friday afternoon when I discovered by chance that they had scheduled a meeting with potential investors to discuss selling a part of the company, and they hadn't informed me. When I confronted Derek, he looked at me with an expression I will never forget. It was a mixture of annoyance and pity, as if I were a senile grandfather who didn't understand reality. "Dad," he said, "you have to understand that you can't be involved in every decision anymore. The company has grown too much. It has very complex structures. The best thing you can do is trust us and enjoy your retirement." Retirement. That word rang in my ears like a death sentence. At that moment, I understood that my own children were pushing me towards the exit, that everything I had built no longer belonged to me, that my legacy was being erased by the very people I had brought into this world. The humiliations began subtly, so gradually that at first I thought it was my imagination, my old man's pride, not wanting to accept that times had changed. But with each passing day, the signs became clearer, more painful, more difficult to ignore. The first time I realized something was really wrong was during a meeting with an important client, a businessman who had hired our services to build a luxury residential complex. I was explaining the technical details of the project, sharing my experience on the best materials for that area of the city, when Derek interrupted me sharply. "Dad, I think it's better if I handle this part. You can leave if you want." The way he said it in front of the client, as if I were an employee who had spoken out of turn, humiliated me deeply. But what hurt the most was the client's reaction. This man, who had known me for over 12 years, who had hired my services on multiple occasions, simply nodded and directed all his attention to Derek, as if I had disappeared from the room. I sat there feeling invisible, while my own son closed a deal that I had initiated using contacts that I had cultivated for decades. When the meeting ended, Derek didn't even thank me for bringing in the client. Instead, he said, "Dad, next time let me know when you have meetings scheduled. It's important that we maintain a consistent message with our clients." As if I were the problem, as if my presence were an obstacle to doing business. Things got worse when Sarah started to get more directly involved in the company's operations. One day, I arrived at the office and found that they had changed the locks on my desk without telling me. When I asked why, the secretary told me with obvious discomfort that Mrs. Sarah had ordered the files to be reorganized to improve the security of confidential information. I had to ask permission from my own daughter-in-law to access documents of the company I had founded. Sarah received me in her new office, which was curiously larger than mine, with a condescending smile that turned my stomach. "Dad Brian," she said, "it's just a temporary measure while we digitize all the files. You understand that we need to protect the company's sensitive information." The word sensitive stuck with me because I understood that she was referring to me. I had become a threat to the security of my own company. My decades of experience, my knowledge of every client, every supplier, every employee were no longer a valuable asset, but a risk that had to be controlled. That afternoon, when I got home, I sat in my favorite armchair, and for the first time in 40 years, I doubted myself. I wondered if I was really becoming a burden, if my way of doing things was harming the company I loved so much. But then I remembered that this company existed because I had created it, because I had risked everything I had to build something from nothing. and it filled me with rage to think that they were making me doubt my own worth. If you are listening to my story up to this point, please tell me in the comments where you are watching from. Sometimes knowing that there are people in the world who listen to me gives me the strength to continue telling what happened to me, because what comes next is even more painful, and I need to feel that I am not alone in this. The next humiliation came during the company's end-of-year party. Traditionally, I was the one who gave the main speech, who thanked all the employees for their work, who announced the bonuses and promotions. But that year, Derek took the microphone without even consulting me. He spoke for 20 minutes about the promising future of the company, about the new challenges that awaited us, about the importance of adapting to change. In his entire speech, he did not mention my name once. It was as if the company had appeared out of nowhere, as if it had no history, as if I had never existed. During dinner, I sat at a table in the back next to mid-level employees, while Derek, Amanda, and Sarah occupied the main table with the directors and the most important clients. One of my oldest employees, Mr. Jenkins, who had worked with me for over 18 years, came over and whispered to me, "Mr. Brian, is everything okay? You look sad." I lied to him. I told him that everything was perfect, that I was proud to see how my children were leading the company into the future. But inside, I was dying, feeling that my place at the main table had been stolen by the very people I had put there. It was like watching them erase my name from the history I myself had written. But the greatest humiliation of all came when Derek decided to update the company's corporate image. He hired an advertising agency to redesign our logo, our uniforms, our trucks, everything. The new design was modern, elegant, professional. But there was one detail that broke my heart. They had removed the phrase that I had put on all our materials from the very beginning, founded by Brian in 1984. According to Derek, that information made the company look old and was not relevant to modern clients. 40 years of history, of sacrifice, of building day by day, reduced to irrelevant information that had to be hidden so as not to scare away young customers. That night, I confronted Amanda, thinking that she, as my daughter, would understand what that decision meant to me. But her response was even more hurtful than Derek's. "Dad," she said, "you have to understand that it's not about you anymore. The company is bigger than any of us, even bigger than you. If we want to compete in today's market, we can't carry around nostalgia for the past." Nostalgia for the past. That's what my daughter called 4 decades of my life. Everything I had sacrificed to give her and her brother a better life. At that moment, I understood that I had lost my children long before I lost the company. They no longer saw me as their father, but as an obstacle to their ambitions. The older employees began to notice the change, too. Several of them would discreetly approach me to ask if I was okay, if there were problems in the family, if I needed anything. They could see what was happening, that the man who had hired them, who knew their families, who had been like a father to many of them, was being gradually pushed out of his own company. But I couldn't complain to them. I couldn't show weakness in front of the people who depended on the company to support their families. So, I pretended that everything was fine, that it was part of a natural transition plan, that I was happy to see my children taking control. But every day, I pretended I died a little more inside. The situation became unbearable when Derek began to publicly question my decisions in front of the employees. During a meeting of supervisors, he contradicted an instruction I had given about the quality of materials for an important project. My dad comes from a different generation. He told everyone present where things were done differently, but we have to be more efficient, more competitive. The supervisors didn't know where to look, because many of them had learned their trade working directly with me. It was clear that my authority was being systematically undermined, that my son was destroying my credibility to establish his own. And the most painful part was that he was using my fatherly love against me, knowing that I would not defend myself publicly so as not to damage his image. That night, alone in my house, I sat looking at the photos of when my children were little, when they saw me as their hero, when they believed I could build anything, solve any problem. Derek on my shoulders, watching me build a wall. Amanda clapping when we finished a house. The two of them running towards me when I came home from work, shouting. Dad with a joy that had become painful to remember. At what point did I stop being their hero and become their burden? When did my experience become obsolete and my presence uncomfortable? I stayed up all night trying to understand how I had reached this point, how I had lost not only my company, but also my children, without even realizing what was happening. The months that followed were a silent nightmare, a slow torture that unfolded day after day without me being able to do anything to stop it. I began to notice that important meetings were scheduled when I was not in the office, that crucial decisions were made in private conversations between Derek, Amanda, and Sarah, and then presented to me as fate's accomplice. One Tuesday morning, I arrived at the office and learned from the secretary that they had signed a multi-million-dollar contract with a hotel chain, a project we had been pursuing for months. When I asked why they hadn't told me about the signing, Derek told me quite naturally, "Dad, the deal closed very quickly over the weekend. We didn't want to bother you on your day off," as if I were a retiree who needed protection, not the founder of the company who had initiated those negotiations. But what really alarmed me was discovering that they had opened new bank accounts without my knowledge. For 40 years, I had personally managed all the company's finances. I knew every dollar that came in and every dollar that went out. But now there were money movements that did not appear in the reports they gave me. Transfers made to accounts I had not authorized. When I confronted Derek about this, he explained that they had optimized the financial structure, creating different accounts for different purposes, and that Sarah, with her experience in corporate finance, was handling that part of the business. "It's more efficient this way. Dad," he said, "you don't have to worry about those technical details anymore." But I knew it wasn't efficiency. It was control. They were cutting me off from the money, so I couldn't make independent decisions. Paranoia began to take hold of me when I started to suspect that they were monitoring my communications. Several times I tried to call old clients or trusted suppliers just to maintain the relationships I had built over decades. But they received me coldly, as if they had been instructed to limit contact with me. One of my oldest suppliers, Mr. Thompson, with whom I had worked for over 18 years, told me something that chilled my blood. "Mr. Brian, your son mentioned that you are not so involved in operations anymore, that all negotiations must go through him. Is it true that you are retiring soon?" That's when I understood that Derek was spreading the story that I was voluntarily retiring, preparing the ground for my departure without it looking like they were kicking me out. The conspiracies became more evident when I started arriving at the office early without notice. One morning, I arrived at 6:30, much earlier than my usual time, and I surprised Derek, Amanda, and Sarah in a meeting in the boardroom. They had documents scattered on the table, laptops open, and they were talking in low voices with an intensity that was cut short abruptly when they saw me. "Dad," Amanda said, clearly nervous, "you're here so early today." Derek quickly closed his laptop and gathered the papers. "We were just reviewing some quarterly numbers." he explained. Nothing important. But I managed to see the heading of one of the documents before he put it away. Generational Transition Plan. Confidential. My own future was being decided in secret meetings without me having a voice or a vote in the matter. That same week, I discreetly hired an independent accountant to review the company's books. He was a man I trusted who had worked with me in the early years when the company was just starting. What he showed me broke my heart and filled me with a rage I had never felt. They had been transferring money to personal accounts, paying themselves multi-million-dollar bonuses without my authorization, buying properties that appeared as company investments, but were in their names. Worse, they had taken out loans using company properties as collateral, committing us to huge debts without consulting me. My accountant told me something that broke my soul. Mr. Brian, if this continues, in 3 years they will have to sell the company to pay off the debts they have incurred. They were destroying in 3 years what I had built in 40. But the most painful thing of all was discovering that they had been talking to lawyers to find a legal way to remove me from the company's management. Through a contact at the law firm they had hired, I learned that they were exploring options to declare me incapacitated to perform executive functions for reasons of age or to force a retirement for the good of the company. They had consulted on the possibility of calling a shareholders' meeting to vote me out, taking advantage of the fact that between Derek, Amanda, and Sarah, they controlled 51% of the shares. It was a meticulously planned betrayal executed by the very people I had brought into the world, whom I had educated, whom I had made partners in my company to secure the family's future. During those terrible weeks, I tried to approach Amanda, thinking that perhaps she could be reasoned with, that a daughter's love might be stronger than ambition. One evening, I invited her to dinner, just the two of us, like when she was little and would tell me about her problems at school. I spoke to her with an open heart. I told her it hurt me to feel that they were pushing me aside, that I needed to understand what I had done wrong to deserve this treatment. Her answer destroyed me. Dad, you haven't done anything wrong. The problem is, you haven't done anything right either. The company needs modern leadership, a vision for the future, not nostalgia for the past. Derek and I are prepared to take the company to the next level, but you are becoming an obstacle. My own daughter was telling me that I was the problem, that my 4 decades of experience were an obstacle to progress. That night, I called my older brother, who lives in California, the only relative I could completely trust. I told him everything that was happening, and he told me something that opened my eyes. Brian, they don't see you as their father. They see you as the last obstacle between them and a fortune they believe they deserve. They have been waiting for you to die or become senile to take everything. But since you are still strong and lucid, they decided to speed up the process. His words were harsh, but they made sense. My children had stopped seeing me as the person who had raised and educated them and started seeing me as the old rich man who stood between them and their inheritance. And Sarah had been the catalyst for that transformation, the one who had taught them to calculate my value in economic terms instead of emotional ones. I then decided to do something I never thought I would have to do: investigate my own family. I hired a private detective to find out what they were planning, who they were meeting with, what financial moves they were making outside the company. What I discovered broke my heart into 1,000 pieces. Sarah had been having regular meetings with executives from competing companies, exploring buyout offers for our company. Derek had opened bank accounts in the Cayman Islands, preparing to hide money once they sold everything. And Amanda had put in her name several properties we had bought as family investments, preparing to keep the most valuable assets when the time came to divide everything up. The evidence was overwhelming and painful. My family had been betraying me for months, maybe years, planning my exit while feigning love and respect for me. Every hug had been fake. Every "I love you" Dad had been a lie. Every consultation for my opinion had been theater to keep me calm while they prepared my corporate and personal execution. I sat in my office looking at the family photos on my desk, wondering if the feelings they showed in those pictures had ever been genuine. When had this betrayal begun? Was it gradual, or was there a specific moment when they decided I was more valuable dead than alive? But what hurt me the most was realizing that Mary, my deceased wife, had died without knowing what her children had become. She always believed we had raised good children, honorable people who would value family above money. If she had been alive to see this betrayal, I think she would have died of sadness rather than illness. And maybe that was a blessing, because at least she left with her illusion intact, believing that her children were good people who would take care of their father when she was gone. She never imagined that her own children would be the ones to hurt me the most, the ones who would turn my last years into a hell of humiliations and betrayals. That night, I made a decision. I was not going to wait for them to execute their plan. If they wanted a war, they were going to get one. The exact moment I discovered the greatest betrayal of my life was a Friday afternoon at 4:20 p.m. I remember the exact time because I was looking at the clock, waiting for 5:00 to go home, when my trusted accountant, Mr. Wilson, came to my office with a folder full of documents and an expression on his face I had never seen before. "Mr. Brian," he said, closing the door behind him, "I need to show you something that is going to hurt you a lot, but you have to know." He opened the folder and spread out in front of me a series of contracts, bank transfers, and legal documents, which at first I didn't fully understand. But as Mr. Wilson explained, each paper, each number, each signature, I felt as if daggers were being driven into my chest, one after another, until I could no longer breathe. What Mr. Wilson had discovered was that my own children had been selling company assets without my knowledge, transferring money to offshore accounts, and preparing a legal structure that would leave me with nothing when they executed their final plan. They had sold 3 of our most valuable properties to shell companies, which were actually owned by Sarah and her family. The money from those sales had been transferred to accounts abroad, beyond the reach of the American authorities. And of course, beyond my reach as well. "Mr. Brian," Mr. Wilson said with tears in his eyes, "they have been systematically stealing from you for the last 3 years. And the worst part is, they've done it in a way that by the time you realize it, it will be too late to recover anything." But that wasn't all. The detective I had hired had gotten me recordings of conversations between Derek and Sarah. Conversations that broke my soul, because they revealed not only the magnitude of their betrayal, but also the absolute contempt they felt for me. In one of the recordings taken at a restaurant, where they thought no one was listening, Sarah was telling Derek, "Your dad is too old. He doesn't understand how modern business works anymore. He's a burden we have to remove before he ruins everything we've built." And Derek, my own son, the blood of my blood, responded, "You're right. He thinks this company is his, but we're the ones who have really made it grow. Without us, he'd still be building 2-bedroom houses for poor families." In another, even more painful recording, Amanda participated in the conversation. My daughter, my only daughter, was saying things I never thought I'd hear from her mouth. "My dad lives in the past. He thinks that because he founded the company 40 years ago, that gives him the right to control it forever. But we've invested our lives in this too, and we deserve to make the decisions. Besides, he's getting old. He could die at any moment and leave us with a huge legal problem if we don't get everything in order beforehand. They spoke of my death as if it were an administrative inconvenience, as if I were a pending task that needed to be resolved so they could move on with their plans. My own daughter was waiting for my death as if it were a liberation. But the recording that destroyed me the most was a conversation among the three of them where they discussed the details of how they were going to get rid of me. Sarah had consulted with lawyers specializing in cases of senile incompetence and had discovered that they could have me declared mentally incapacitated if they got the testimony of 2 doctors and a psychologist. "It's easy," Sarah said in the recording. "We hire the right specialists. They evaluate Dad Brian, determine he's no longer fit to make business decisions due to his advanced age, and we assume full legal control," Derek asked. "And what if he resists?" Sarah's response chilled my blood. At 68 years old, who's going to believe him? Everyone will just think he's a stubborn old man who doesn't want to accept reality. Amanda added her own venom to the conversation. "Besides, we can use his behavior from the last few months as evidence. He's been paranoid, distrustful, asking strange questions about the finances. Any psychologist will say those are symptoms of early dementia or age-related cognitive decline." They were using my natural reaction to their betrayal as evidence that I was losing my mind. My distrust, which was completely justified because they were actually betraying me, was going to be presented as proof that I was crazy. It was a diabolical plan, perfectly calculated to destroy not only my wealth, but also my dignity and my sanity. In that recording, they also discussed what to do with me after they took full control. Derek suggested we can put him in a luxury retirement home, something that looks good socially, like we're taking care of him. But Sarah had a different idea. Better to buy him a small house in some town far from here where he can't interfere with the business. We give him a monthly pension so he can live comfortably but without access to the company or important contacts. Amanda agreed. "Yes, it's better to keep him away. If he stays here, he'll always be trying to stick his nose in everything." They were planning to banish me, to take me away from everything I had built, to turn me into a gilded prisoner somewhere, where I couldn't get in the way of their plans. But what really destroyed me was hearing how they talked about Mary. "My deceased wife," Sarah said. "Luckily, Mom's not around anymore, because she never would have allowed us to do this. She always defended the old man, no matter how wrong he was." And Derek responded, "Mom never understood that Dad was becoming a problem. She saw him with the eyes of a loving wife, not with the eyes of a businesswoman." Amanda added, "Mom was from another generation. She believed in those romantic things like marital loyalty and respect for elders. We have to be more pragmatic." They were talking about the woman who had given birth to them, who had sacrificed her own life to raise them, as if she had been an obstacle to their ambitions, as if the love Mary felt for me had been a weakness, not a virtue. That night, I came home and sat in the armchair where Mary used to knit while I reviewed construction plans. For the first time in 4 years since her death, I spoke to her out loud, as if she were there with me. "Mary," I said, "our children have become monsters. I don't know if it was my fault for giving them too much, or if they were always like this, and we just didn't see it. But they are not the people we thought we raised." I cried that night like I hadn't cried since my wife's funeral, but these tears were different. It wasn't pain from a natural loss. It was pain from a betrayal that should never have existed. It was the pain of discovering that the people I loved most in the world hated me enough to plan my destruction. The next day, Saturday morning. Derek came to my house with Sarah and the children, as if nothing had happened. They were coming for breakfast, a family tradition we had kept for years. Sarah hugged me and said, "Good morning, Dad." Brian, with the same fake smile as always. Derek asked me how I had slept, if I felt well, if I needed anything. The children ran to me, shouting. Grandpa and I hugged them, wondering if they too would learn to betray when they grew up. If evil was something inherited, along with green eyes and tall stature. Throughout breakfast, I kept the conversation normal, pretending I knew nothing, observing every gesture, every look, every word, searching for signs of the betrayal I now knew existed. But the most painful part of that breakfast was realizing that I had also become like them, a liar, an actor feigning feelings I no longer had. When Derek asked if I was happy with how the company was doing, I told him yes, that I was proud to see how he and Amanda were taking on responsibilities. When Sarah asked if I was in good health, I told her I had never felt better. When Amanda asked if I had plans for the future, I told her I just wanted to enjoy my grandchildren and watch the family business grow. It was all a lie, but it was what they wanted to hear. And as I lied, for the first time in my life, I began to plan my revenge, because if they could betray their own father, I could also betray my own children. The difference was that I had a justification they would never have. They had started the war 4 weeks after discovering the betrayal, when I had already begun to secretly plan my revenge. Derek came to my house one afternoon with an expression I hadn't seen on his face since he was a child. He seemed nervous, almost vulnerable, as if he had been rehearsing what he was going to say. "Dad," he said, sitting in front of me in the living room, "I've been thinking a lot about us, about the family, about the company. I think I've been very stressed lately, and maybe I've been too hard on you. I want you to know that I love you and I respect everything you've done for us." For a moment, my father's heart filled with hope. I thought that maybe he had discovered for himself how wrong he was, that filial love had overcome ambition, that my son had come back to me. How naive I was to believe that a leopard could change its spots. Derek continued speaking with an emotion that seemed genuine. "Dad, I want to propose something to you. What do you think if we organize a big celebration for the company's 40th anniversary? Something special where we can honor everything you've built, where all our employees, clients, and friends can recognize your legacy." My heart quickened with a joy I hadn't felt in months. Finally, I thought my children were going to publicly acknowledge my value. They were going to give me the place I deserved as the founder of the company. It will be an unforgettable party. Derek continued. With all the important business people from the city, with our longtime employees, with the whole family, we want it to be a perfect night for you. Dad. Tears welled up in my eyes as I listened to my son plan this celebration, which sounded like the recognition I had been waiting for so long. For the next 2 weeks, the whole family threw themselves into organizing the party with a dedication that deeply moved me. Amanda came every day to consult me on the details. What food did I prefer? What music did I want them to play? Who did I want us to invite? Sarah was in charge of the floral arrangements and decorations, telling me she wanted everything to be worthy of the great Brian. Even the employees participated in the preparations, several of them approaching me to say they were preparing special surprises for the celebration. For the first time in months, I felt loved, valued, and respected by my own family. I thought that maybe the last few months had just been a rough patch, that family love had prevailed over personal ambitions. The night of the party. I arrived at the ballroom of the most elegant hotel in the city, feeling like a king. There were more than 250 people waiting for me, current and former employees, clients of decades, suppliers, family, friends, important business people from the entire region. Everyone greeted me with genuine affection, congratulated me on my achievements, told me stories of how my work had impacted their lives. An employee who had worked with me for 12 years told me, "Mr. Brian, thanks to you, my family has their own home. You changed our lives." An elderly client hugged me and whispered, "The house you built for me 18 years ago is still perfect. We raised our children there, and now our grandchildren live there." In that moment, I felt proud of every brick I had laid, of every decision I had made, of every sacrifice I had made. Derek took the microphone to give the main speech, and I settled into my table, waiting to hear the words of recognition I so badly needed. "Good evening, everyone," he began. "Today we are here to celebrate 40 years of Harrison Builders. So far, everything sounded perfect. My father, Brian, founded this company when he had nothing more than a dream and two hands willing to work." The room erupted in applause, and I felt my chest swell with pride. For more than 4 decades, he has been the heart of this company, the man who built it from the ground up to what it is today. Every word was like a balm to my wounded soul. Every phrase restored the dignity I thought I had lost forever. But then Derek's tone changed subtly. However, he continued, "Like all great stories, this one must also have a fitting end. My father has worked tirelessly for 40 years, has given his all to this company, and now it is time for him to enjoy the fruits of his labor." The room fell silent, and I felt that something was not right. That is why tonight, on this special night, we want to officially announce that my father is retiring from the active management of the company. The words hit me like a hammer to the chest. This was not a celebration. It was a forced farewell. Starting tomorrow, the new generation of Harrisons will take full control of the company, leading it into the future with fresh ideas and modern methods. The silence in the room was deafening. I could feel all eyes fixed on me, some of surprise, some of compassion, some of morbid curiosity. My hands began to tremble, not from nerves, but from a rage that began to boil inside me. This had been a perfectly orchestrated ambush. They had deceived me with promises of recognition to lead me like a lamb to a public slaughter. Derek continued speaking. "We know it will be difficult for my father to step away from the company he loves so much, but we are sure he understands that this is the right time for him to make way for the new generation." It was the most refined humiliation I had ever received in my life. They were kicking me out of my own company while pretending it was a celebration in my honor. I tried to stand up, to walk to the microphone, to say something, anything, to defend my dignity. But Amanda quickly approached and put her hand on my shoulder, gently pressing me to stay seated. "Dad," she whispered in my ear, "please don't make a scene. This is what's best for everyone." Best for everyone. Humiliating me publicly was best for everyone. Derek continued his speech as if I were an object, not a person. Harrison Builders will continue to honor the legacy of its founder while embracing the opportunities of the future. We are confident that under new leadership, the company will reach heights that not even my father could have imagined. Every word was a stab. Every phrase was an elegant way of saying that I was no longer useful, that I was an obstacle to progress. Then came the most humiliating moment of all. Derek called Sarah and Amanda to the main table, and the three of them stood in front of the microphone as if they were the new royalty of an empire I had built. "We want to thank our father and founder for everything he has taught us," Amanda said with a smile that I now knew was completely fake. "But we also want everyone to know that the company is in good hands, that the future of Harrison Builders is secure." Sarah took the microphone and added, "Mr. Bryan can rest assured knowing that his legacy will continue, but with the energy and vision that modern times require." It was as if they were talking about me, as if I were already dead, as if I were just a memory from the past that had to be honored before being forgotten. The audience began to applaud, but it was an awkward, forced applause, like when people don't know how to react to an embarrassing situation. Some old employees looked at me with faces of confusion and sadness, clearly not understanding what was really happening. One of my oldest supervisors, Mr. Davis, approached my table and whispered, "Mr. Bryan, is this what you wanted?" I couldn't answer him because I had a lump in my throat that prevented me from speaking. I could only shake my head negatively while I felt tears threatening to escape my eyes in front of 250 people who had come to what they thought was a celebration of my career. The party continued as if nothing had happened with music, dancing, and lively conversations, but I remained seated at my table, feeling as if my soul had been ripped from my body. Several guests approached to congratulate me on my well-deserved retirement, not realizing they were witnessing a public execution disguised as a celebration. Derek, Amanda, and Sarah received congratulations and good wishes, as if they had just accomplished something admirable, when in fact they had just committed the cruelest corporate patricide I had ever seen. While they toasted to the company's new beginning, I sat there humiliated, betrayed, but also for the first time in months, completely determined to execute the revenge I had been planning. That night, I not only lost my company, I also forever lost any trace of love I might have had for my children. The day after that public humiliation, I arrived at the office earlier than ever. It was 5:30 in the morning, and the building was completely empty and silent. I went up to my office and sat at my desk for what I knew would be the last time as the director of the company I had built with my own hands. I checked every drawer, every file, every family photo that had decorated that space for decades. At 7:00 sharp, I called Derek, Amanda, and Sarah, telling them I needed to see them urgently in the boardroom. My voice was calm, controlled, but inside burned a rage that had been building for months. It was time for them to know that I knew exactly what they had been doing. It was time to take off the mask of the naive father and show them the man they had truly awakened with their betrayal. When they arrived at the office around 8, all three had surprised looks on their faces. They clearly didn't expect me to be there so early after the previous night's celebration. Derek entered first, with that condescending smile he had perfected over the last few months. "Good morning, Dad," he said. "I thought after last night you'd want to rest a bit. It was a very emotional night for you." Amanda and Sarah entered behind him, both with expressions of false concern. "Are you feeling okay?" Dad Amanda asked. "Do you need anything?" Sarah added. Their performance was perfect, but I had already seen behind the curtain. I knew that every word of concern was a lie, that every gesture of affection was pure theater designed to keep me under control until they fully executed their plan. I invited them to sit at the boardroom table, the same table where we had made thousands of family decisions during the company's golden years. "I want to talk to you about some things I've recently discovered," I told them, keeping my voice serene but firm. "Things that have hurt me deeply and that I need you to explain." Derek exchanged a quick glance with Sarah, a glance they didn't think I'd notice, but which confirmed my suspicions. "What are you talking about?" Dad, Amanda asked with that sweet voice she used as a child when she had done something mischievous. "You're being very mysterious." But I was no longer the naive father who was fooled by sweet voices and fake smiles. I was a man who had discovered the truth and was ready to face it head on. I took out of my briefcase the folder containing all the evidence I had gathered. The financial documents, the fraudulent bank transfers, the transcripts of the recordings, the private detectives' reports. I placed it on the table with a thud that made them jump. "This is what I want you to explain to me," I said, opening the folder and spreading the documents in front of them. "These multi-million-dollar transfers to offshore accounts that you made without my authorization. These sales of company properties at ridiculously low prices to companies that turn out to be owned by Sarah's family. These bonuses you assigned yourselves, bonuses that add up to more money than I have earned in my entire life." The expression on their faces changed instantly from feigned surprise to real panic. They could no longer pretend innocence when the evidence was right there in front of their eyes. Derek was the first to try to justify the unjustifiable. "Dad," he said, in that voice he used when trying to explain something complicated to someone he considered inferior. "Those are complex business decisions we made to optimize the company's financial structure. I know you don't fully understand them, but trust that everything we've done has been for the benefit of the company." His arrogance outraged me more than his betrayal. After stealing millions of dollars from me, he had the nerve to tell me that I didn't understand, that I should trust him. "Optimize the financial structure," I shouted, losing control of my voice for the first time. "This is called theft. Derek, it's called betrayal. It's called destroying your own father to enrich yourself and your damned wife." The silence that followed my outburst was deafening. It was then that I pulled out the most powerful weapon I had, the transcripts of their private conversations. "But this is not the worst part," I continued, spreading the pages in front of them. "The worst part is this. Your own words recorded while you were planning how to get rid of me." I began to read aloud the most hurtful phrases. "Your dad is too old. He no longer understands how modern businesses work. He's a burden we have to remove." Sarah's face turned white as a sheet. "He thinks this company is his, but we are the ones who have really made it grow." I continued reading Derek's words. "My dad lives in the past. He could die at any moment and leave us with a gigantic legal problem." I read Amanda's words. With every sentence I read, I watched the facade of respect and family love they had maintained for months crumble. Amanda was the first to break. She began to cry, but they were not tears of remorse. They were tears of panic from someone who had been caught. "Dad, I can explain everything," she sobbed. "Things are not what they seem. We love you. We were just trying to protect the company, to secure the future for the whole family. But I had no more patience for lies. Protect the company from what I yelled at her. From me, from the man who founded it, from the man who worked himself to death for 40 years to give you a life I never had." Sarah tried to intervene with her calm, calculating voice. "Dad Brian, I understand you're upset, but you have to see the bigger picture. The company needed to be restructured. And you shut up," I roared at her. "You are not my daughter. You have no right to have an opinion about my company." Derek finally showed his true colors. He stood up from his chair with an expression of rage I had never seen in him. A rage that revealed the real man hiding behind the respectful son. "You know what? Dad, you're right. Yes, we planned all of this. Yes, we want you away from the company. And you know why? Because you can't run it anymore. Because your outdated methods are holding us back. Because every day you spend here, We lose money and opportunities. His brutal honesty hurt me more than all his lies combined. This company is worth 10 times more than it was when you were running it alone. He continued. We made it grow. We brought in the important clients. We modernized everything. You are no longer needed here. It was as if he had slapped me with every word. I stood up from my chair and walked towards Derek until I was face to face with him. He was taller than me, younger, physically stronger, but at that moment I had something he would never have, the moral authority of a betrayed man. Do you know what the saddest part of all this is? Derek, I said, looking him directly in the eyes. It's not that you stole my money. It's not that you publicly humiliated me. The saddest thing is that you became the exact opposite of what I tried to teach you. I taught you to work with honesty, and you became a thief. I taught you to value family, and you betrayed your own father. I taught you to respect the employees, and you treat them like numbers on a spreadsheet. Every word was a truth that hurt him. I could see it in his eyes. Amanda tried to mediate between us, but I had no patience for her crocodile tears. Dad, please, we can fix this, she said between sobs. We can find a solution that works for everyone. But I knew there was no going back. Fix what, Amanda? The fact that you plan to declare me insane to get my money. The fact that you talk about my death as if it were a liberation. The fact that you turned the love your mother felt for me into something to be ashamed of. My daughter fell silent because she knew that every accusation was true. Sarah, on the other hand, maintained that cold, calculating expression that I now recognized as her true personality. Brian, she said, using my name for the first time without the fake dad. You can fight with us all you want, but the reality is, you no longer have any power here. The company is ours now. It was then that I smiled for the first time in that meeting. A smile that baffled them because they didn't expect me to be able to smile after everything they had said. You're right, Sarah, I told her. I no longer have power in this company, but there's something you don't know. Something you will find out very soon. I walked towards the door of the boardroom, but before leaving, I turned to look at them one last time. Revenge, my dear children, is a dish best served cold, and I've had months to prepare the perfect banquet. I left that room knowing it was the last time I would be in a family meeting as the director of the company, but I also knew it was the first time in months that I was leaving a meeting as the winner. They had just revealed all their cards, but I still had an ace up my sleeve that would change everything forever. That same afternoon, at 4:00 sharp, I went to the corporate building of Apex Builders, the largest competing company in the entire region. For 40 years, we had been rivals, but always with mutual respect. Its CEO, Meister Johnson, was a man my age, who had built his company at the same time I was building mine. We had competed for the same contracts, the same clients, the same land, but never unfairly. 3 months earlier, when I began to suspect my children's true intentions, Mr. Johnson had made me a proposal that I rejected at the time out of family loyalty. But after the morning's confrontation, that proposal had become my lifeline and the perfect instrument of my revenge. Mr. Johnson received me in his office with a mixture of surprise and curiosity. Brian, he said, shaking my hand firmly, I didn't expect to see you so soon. Have you thought about my proposal? His proposal was simple, but revolutionary, to form a strategic partnership where I would contribute my experience, my contacts, and my knowledge of the local market, while he would contribute Apex's financial structure and operational capacity. But there was an additional element that made the proposal irresistible. He had been investigating my children's operations and knew exactly which contracts were about to expire, which clients were dissatisfied, and what the weak points of Harrison Builders were. "I am ready to accept," I told him. "But I want you to know that this is not just a business for me. It's a declaration of war." We spent the next 3 hours reviewing the details of our agreement. I would give him access to my entire client database, which I had cultivated for 4 decades, and which my children had taken for granted. I would share the technical secrets I had developed to build faster and cheaper than the competition. More importantly, I would give him privileged information about Harrison Builders' developing projects I knew better than anyone, because I had participated in their initial planning before being excluded from important decisions. In return, Apex offered me a 30% stake in all profits from the contracts we won together, plus an executive salary that was 3 times what my own children had been paying me as a consultant in my own company. But the most satisfying part of the deal was the strategy we designed to execute our plan. Apex had the financial capacity to offer better prices than Harrison Builders on most of the major contracts that were up for bid. I had the personal relationships with the decision-makers, relationships that my children thought belonged to them by inheritance, but were actually mine by merit. Over the next 5 months, we were going to systematically attack every major source of income of my former company, using my inside knowledge to anticipate their moves and my personal credibility to convince clients to switch providers. It wasn't just competition. It was commercial warfare led by someone who knew all the enemy's weaknesses. We struck the first blow that very week. The state government was about to bid on the construction of a 400-home housing complex, the largest contract of the year and one that Harrison Builders took for granted because they had been negotiating informally for months. But I had known the director of public works for 18 years. I had built the house where he lived with his family. I had been his youngest son's godfather. One phone call was enough to get a private meeting where I explained that I now worked with Apex and that we could offer better quality, a better price, and a better delivery time than any other company. "Mr. Brian," he told me, "if you guarantee that you will personally oversee this project, the contract is yours." It was that simple. 40 years of impeccable reputation were worth more than all the PowerPoint presentations Derek could prepare. The news of the lost contract hit my children like a lightning bolt. Derek called me that same afternoon, hysterical, shouting things over the phone that I never thought I would hear from my own son's mouth. "How could you do this to us?" he yelled. "You're a traitor. You stole that contract from us. It was ours." The irony of him calling me a traitor after everything he had done to me was almost comical. "It wasn't yours," I replied with icy calm. "It was mine. My contacts, my reputation, my credibility. You thought you could kick me out of my company and keep everything I had built. Now you were learning that Brian doesn't come free with the package." I hung up the phone, feeling a satisfaction I hadn't experienced in months. But that was just the beginning. In the following weeks, Apex and I executed a campaign that was surgically precise in its cruelty. We contacted every major client of Harrison Builders, offering them better terms if they switched providers. It wasn't hard to convince them. I had built houses for many of them. I knew their families. I had been to their weddings and baptisms. When Brian told them he now worked with another company, they followed me. They didn't follow the company. They followed me. In 2 months, Harrison Builders had lost 60% of its most important clients. Their revenue plummeted. Their cash flow became complicated. And for the first time in decades, they had to start laying off employees. The most devastating blow came when we got 3 of their most important projects canceled by the clients. I used my inside knowledge of the quality problems they had been hiding, the delays they had been covering up in reports, the technical deficiencies I had noticed. But they had ignored because they considered my observations to be outdated methods. It turned out that those outdated methods were what maintained the quality and punctuality our clients expected. Without my supervision, projects began to fail, clients began to complain, and lawsuits began to roll in. In 5 months, Harrison Builders went from being a solid, respected company to a company in crisis, struggling to survive. It was then that I decided to deliver the media coup de grace. I agreed to an interview on the most watched news program in the region, where I told my story without filters or euphemisms. I explained how I had founded the company with my own hands, how I had sacrificed 4 decades of my life to build something I believed would be the family legacy, and how my own children had betrayed, stolen from, and publicly humiliated me. I didn't mention names on air, but anyone who knew our family story knew exactly who I was talking about. The interview went viral on social media with thousands of comments of support from people who identified with my story of family betrayal and abandonment in old age. The impact of the interview was devastating for my children. In a society like ours, where respect for parents and family are fundamental values, being publicly pointed out as ungrateful children who betrayed their elderly father turned them into social pariahs. Clients who were still with them began to cancel contracts due to a loss of confidence in the company's family values. Suppliers began to demand advanced payments because they doubted the moral stability of the management. Old employees who had worked with me for decades began to resign to look for work at other companies, including Apex. In less than a year, everything they had built on my back was crumbling like a house of cards. The night that interview aired, I stayed up watching the reactions on the internet, reading the supportive comments from hundreds of people who had experienced similar situations with their own children. "Mr. Bryan, you did the right thing." Someone wrote, "Ungrateful children need to learn that actions have consequences," commented another. "How sad that parents have to defend themselves against their own children," said a woman who had clearly gone through something similar. At that moment, I understood that my revenge had transcended the personal to become something symbolic. The story of the father who refused to be a silent victim of his children's ambition. I fell asleep that night, feeling that for the first time in over a year, I had regained not only my dignity, but also my power. The war was just beginning, but I had already won the most important battle, the battle for the truth. 5 months after that television interview, while reviewing the profit numbers from my partnership with Apex in my new executive office, I received a call I had been waiting for a long time. It was Amanda, and for the first time in years, her voice sounded broken, humble, desperate. "Dad," she said, "we need to talk. The company is in serious trouble. We need your help." The irony of that call filled me with a deep and bitter satisfaction at the same time. The same children who had thrown me out of my own company, who had declared me obsolete and useless, who had celebrated my public humiliation, were now begging me to come back and save them from the disaster they themselves had created. But it was too late for pleas and too late for forgiveness. I agreed to meet with them one last time, not out of compassion, but because I wanted to see them acknowledge their defeat face to face. We met at a neutral cafe far from the offices of both companies, in a place where no one could overhear the conversation that I knew would be definitive for our family relationship. When they arrived, I was struck by how they had changed in those months. Derek had aged years in just a few months. He had deep, dark circles under his eyes and had lost weight. Amanda looked haggard, nervous, without the confident glow she had always had. Sarah, for the first time since I had known her, looked vulnerable without that mask of superiority she had perfected for so many years. Power, I discovered, was a better cosmetic than any anti-wrinkle cream, and they had lost both. Derek got straight to the point, without the false courtesies he had used for months to manipulate me. Dad, we know we were wrong. We know we treated you badly, that we made decisions that hurt you. But now we need to work together to save the company. If Harrison Builders disappears, we all lose. His pragmatism outraged me more than his previous lies. Not even in that moment of desperation was he capable of a genuine apology, of acknowledging the emotional damage he had caused me. For him, everything was still about numbers and profits. He had never understood that they had broken my heart, that they had destroyed the image I had of them as my children. We can give you a larger percentage of the profits, he added. We can give you your office back. We can make any changes you want. We just need you to come back and use your contacts to recover the contracts we lost. Amanda tried to appeal to my paternal feelings with tears that no longer moved me. Dad, we are your family. We are your children. I know we made mistakes, but blood is more important than any business. Mom wouldn't have wanted us to destroy the family over money. Mentioning Mary was the biggest mistake she could have made. Now you talk to me about your mother, I said with a coldness that made her tremble. The same mother you made fun of when you were planning to declare me insane. The same mother who, according to you, defended me with the eyes of a loving wife instead of the eyes of a businesswoman. Don't you dare use Mary's memory to justify what you did. Amanda fell silent, because she knew I had her own words on tape, that she couldn't deny what she had said about her own mother. Sarah, always calculating, tried to negotiate as if we were discussing a business contract. Dad Brian, let's be realistic. You can completely destroy Harrison Builders if you want, but that would also destroy the 40-year legacy that you built. Do you really want everything you worked for to end in ruin? Her argument was clever, but she didn't understand that my legacy was no longer in Harrison Builders. My legacy was in the thousands of families who lived in homes I had built, in the employees who had learned the values of hard work and honesty by working with me, in the reputation for integrity that had followed me to apex. My legacy, I replied, is not a company. It's an example. And the example I'm setting now is that actions have consequences, that betrayal has a price, and that dignity is not for sale at any price. During that conversation, I explained to them in cold, calculated detail everything I had done to destroy their company, and everything I would continue to do until I saw it disappear completely. I told them about every client I had won over using my personal reputation, about every contract I had sabotaged using my inside knowledge, about every valuable employee I had convinced to join Apex. You thought you could throw me out like any other employee, I told them. But you forgot that I wasn't just the founder of the company. I was the company. Without me, Harrison Builders is just a pretty name on an empty building. The desperation on their faces when they understood the magnitude of my revenge gave me more satisfaction than any financial gain I had ever made in my entire life. Derek made one last desperate attempt to appeal to what was left of my paternal love. Dad, if you do this, if you completely destroy the company, you will also be destroying the future of your grandchildren. They are not to blame for what happened between us. It was true that my grandchildren were innocent. But it was also true that their parents should have thought of that before betraying me. My grandchildren, I replied, are going to learn a lesson you never learned. That in life you have to earn things through hard work and honesty, not by stealing them from the grandparents who love them. If you have put them in a difficult situation, it is your responsibility to solve it, not mine. It was a hard truth, but a necessary one. I was not going to let them use my grandchildren as emotional shields to escape the consequences of their actions. At the end of that meeting, which lasted almost 3 hours, my children finally understood that there was no going back, that no negotiation was possible, that there was no forgiveness in my heart for what they had done to me. Amanda cried openly. But they were no longer tears of manipulation. They were tears of real desperation. Derek remained silent, staring at the table, finally understanding that he had completely underestimated the man who had raised him. Sarah maintained her composure, but I could see in her eyes that she was calculating escape options, perhaps thinking of divorcing Derek before the financial disaster caught up with her. 2. When I stood up to leave, I told them something I had wanted to say for months. You didn't just lose a company, you lost your father, and that loss is for life. 3 months after that meeting, Harrison Builders officially declared bankruptcy. The creditors seized all the assets. The remaining employees left without severance pay, and the building that had been my work home for 4 decades stood empty and abandoned. But I didn't feel sadness when I passed by it for the last time. I felt liberation. That company no longer represented my values or my legacy. It was just the empty shell of what was once great, destroyed by ambition and ingratitude. My true legacy was at Apex, where I had been received with respect and admiration, where my experience was valued, where every day I could continue to build without anyone questioning my right to be there. Now, 3 years after all this, I work at Apex with more energy and enthusiasm than ever. At 71, I still oversee projects. I still design projects. I still build houses for families who appreciate my work. My new partners treat me with the respect I deserve. They consult me on important decisions. They value my experience without making me feel like a burden. I have earned more money in these 3 years than in the last 6 years at my own company. And more importantly, I have regained my dignity and self-respect. I have not spoken to Derek, Amanda, or Sarah since that last meeting. I have not met the grandchildren who were born after our breakup. It is a high price, but it is a price I am willing to pay to keep my dignity intact. If someone were to ask me if I regret the revenge I carried out against my own children, the answer would be no. They made the decision to betray me, to humiliate me, to steal from me, and I made the decision to defend myself. A man who does not defend himself when he is attacked is not a man. He is a victim. And I refuse to be a victim of anyone, not even my own blood. My children learned a lesson that was perhaps necessary, that respect is not inherited. It is earned, and that family is not a blank check for betrayal and abuse. Maybe one day they will understand that what I did to them was not revenge. It was justice. And maybe, just maybe, when they are old like me, they will understand the value of the dignity that I defended until the end. Until then, I live at peace with myself, knowing that I did the right thing, even though it cost me everything I loved most in the world. And you who have listened to my story to the end, what would you do if something like this happened to you? Would you stay silent, allowing your dignity to be trampled? Or would you have the courage to defend yourself even if it cost you everything? Do you think a father has an obligation to endure any humiliation from his children? Or do you think that even paternal love has its limits when it becomes abuse? Life taught me that sometimes you have to lose everything to find yourself. That sometimes the only way to win is to be willing to lose. And that dignity is the only thing that truly belongs to us, and that no one can take from us without our permission. If this story stirred something in your heart, if it made you reflect on the value of true family versus blood family, comment below and leave your like. Tell us if you have experienced something similar. If you know someone who has gone through a family betrayal, or simply tell me what you think of the decisions I made. Your comment will make a big difference, because it will remind me that although I lost my children, I gained something more valuable. The certainty that in this world there are still people who understand the difference between what is right and what is easy. Subscribe if you want to hear more stories like this. Stories of ordinary people who faced extraordinary situations and had to make difficult decisions. Because at the end of the day, we all have a story to tell.